Hello and welcome to another video in the series Archaeology and Islam. My name is Dan Gibson, and if you have a question you'd like to ask, you can email me at the email address on your screen, dan@canbooks.ca. Now, over the years, I've visited many mosques in the Middle East, and early on in my visiting of different sites that I examined throughout the Middle East, I discovered that some of these mosques claimed that they pointed to the city of Jerusalem rather than to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. So I decided I would make a study of these mosques and list them in a database to see, well, exactly how many mosques that there were that pointed to Jerusalem rather than to Mecca. And I would use a GPS unit, and I would get some accurate data that I could work with to make this list up. I thought it would make a very interesting small study. Little did I know that it would become a very large study, as I would have to examine every mosque built in the first 200 years of Islam in order to understand what was happening with their Qibla direction. The Qibla being the direction that the mosque points, because in Islam there is a holy direction known as the Qibla. And that is the direction that prayer is to be made, that is the direction that the pilgrimage is to be made, that is the direction that halal food is to be made when they kill the animal, and so forth. So I began my study, and it wasn't long before I asked a question. There are many mosques that do not point to Mecca and Saudi Arabia. How could they all be built during the first 16 or 17 months that Islam was in existence? Because we know that the Qibla direction changed about 16 or 17 months after the founding of Islam. Well, then I discovered it was all very confusing, and it meant I had to make the database, and then I made charts and mapped it out so I could understand what I was looking at. And I discovered that there were 4 different Qibla directions used during the first 200 years of Islam. Now, the film The Sacred City investigates these different Qibla directions, and you can watch that film and learn about it. But I was amazed that there were these 4, and I've kept finding them. Even after making the film, we continued to find more, and people would write and say, have you considered this mosque or that mosque? And oh my goodness, I didn't realize. Still, even after all these new discoveries, every mosque faces one of these different 4 directions. Now, in this program, we will look at the first 100 years of Islam at all of the mosques that face towards the city of Petra in southern Jordan. Every mosque faced Petra, or we can't measure the mosque. This is the problem when looking at some modern mosques that have been built on top of the old mosques. Did they follow the old foundation, or did they tear it all down and reset the Qibla, and now we have a new mosque, even though originally an old mosque stood on the spot? And sometimes we can't use the new mosque because we have no way of being able to understand what was the original mosque's Qibla and how did it point, because those ruins and the foundations have been lost over time. An example of this is the mosque called the Qiblatain Mosque, which means 2 Qiblas. That is found in Medina in Saudi Arabia. It's a very old mosque, and it's been there for centuries, and it's been rebuilt several times. But in 1987 was the last major large renovation, and they went and tore down the mosque, and as they tore it down, they revealed the earlier foundation underneath the mosque. And so the architect, a famous architect, Abd al-Wahid al-Wakil, he went down and he measured the foundations, and he did drawings of them, and he got the data of what that early foundation looked at. And then they dug it all up and built the new building. And from that, he discovered that Qibla pointed generally towards Jerusalem, but it also points generally towards Petra. And this is a problem with this mosque. Which way did the early mosque point? Because they're so close to each other in direction. So perhaps this is where Bukhari got the idea that some mosques pointed towards Jerusalem. Bukhari also mentions that some mosques pointed towards Damascus or Shem. Bukhari was aware of this when he wrote his writings about 350 years after the time of Muhammad. The next mosque we want to look at is in Hama in Syria. It's an Umayyad mosque, and it points almost exactly towards Petra in Jordan. This mosque has been damaged and rebuilt several times, but they have always rebuilt it on the foundations of the earlier mosque. Next we go to the ancient city of Hawar, known as Humayma in southern Jordan. And this is the house, the large house or castle. Some people use the word castle or manor house, built by the Abbas family. They are famous later on because the Abbasids come from the Abbas family. And their house has a Qibla direction. People would line up in the open courtyard and they would pray towards the city of Petra, which was to the north. Next we go to Khirbet al-Minya. This is in the northeastern corner of the Sea of Galilee. It's an Umayyad palace. There's an inscription in a gateway that says it was built by Al-Walid, so we can date the building of this whole complex and the mosque, and it points within 1 degree towards Petra. Next, we move on to the oldest remaining mosque in the Iranian city of Damghan. It's a long ways from Petra, so they had to figure out how to do it from a long distance, but they got their Qibla within 5.5 degrees accuracy, and it pointed directly to Petra. Now, the next mosque we go to is Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Now, there's some misunderstanding about this mosque, and that's because there are 2 Al-Aqsa mosques, and today there are even some other Al-Aqsa mosques that are using the same name. And so the Al-Aqsa mosque that's mentioned in the Quran in Surah, the 17th Surah, it talks about the city of Jirana, which is a few miles outside of Masjid al-Haram. That's the only description we are given. Al-Waqidi tells us that this mosque is located on the banks of a wadi. So it's on the side of a wadi. It's not on top of a mountain, as you would find in Jerusalem. This is a particular mosque that is found near a wadi a few miles away from Masjid al-Haram. Now, that fits a place, a description of a place, near the city of Petra. If you watch the film, The Sacred City, you will see that I am claiming that the original Masjid al-Haram was in the city of Petra, and that all of the mosques from the first part of Islam pointed to the city of Petra. And if we go to Petra, we can locate today the place where this mosque was at the side of the wadi, and there's a spring of water that is there, and it fits the description, where people would come to the spring of water at Al-Aqsa where they would wash themselves. It is called the farthest mosque because it was the farthest mosque just outside of the city where the pilgrims would wash before they made their way on pilgrimage into the city. Now, the mosque in Jerusalem is different. That mosque was built about 90 years after the Hijrah. So it didn't exist while the Quran was being written. 90 years after the Hijrah, it was started by the Caliph Umar. He was there. He started the construction. His son Al-Walid finished the construction of that mosque. Interestingly enough, that mosque points about 3.4 degrees off of Petra. It is very close to Petra, within 3.5 degrees of pointing at Petra. It does not point to Mecca, and it does not point to one of the other Qiblas. Very clearly it points to the city of Petra. So that's Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, pointing to Petra. Khirbet al-Mafjar is the next mosque, and it is found in Jericho. In Israel today, it is an Umayyad palace, and it points within 1 degree of accuracy to Petra in Jordan. Now, next we come to Anjar, and the entire Umayyad complex with the mosque inside is all aligned very carefully to point to Petra. It's off by 3.6 degrees using modern equipment to measure today, but it's very close to the city of Petra. Next we move on to Jordan, to the Umayyad palace called the Mushatta Palace. It contains a mosque as well, and it points about 4 degrees off of Petra, but very accurate towards Petra. If we go a little farther, looking other places, we'll find in Oman, the old mosque in Baushar, and this mosque points within 1 degree of Petra. The same is true of the other old mosque in Oman, the Sumail Mosque. In Oman, it points within 2 degrees of Petra. Even if you go way out to Uzbekistan, where the Muslim armies were fighting, and when they arrived there, they built a mosque called Bibi Samarkand, and that mosque is within 2 degrees of Petra. Another mosque that was pointed out to me recently is in the ancient city of Jerash. That's in Jordan, and Jerash was a Roman city. And a mosque was built, and it wasn't built, I mean, the Roman roads are very direct, and the mosque is purposely tilted a little bit, and it points to the city of Petra. It's off by a couple of degrees, but it points to the city of Petra. Also in Jordan, there are other places like the Umayyad Qasr Mushash, 4 degrees off of Petra. The Umayyad buildings in Walid, 1.2 degrees off of Petra. The Umayyad Mosque in Udru, it is 1.7 degrees off of Petra, just under less than 2 degrees. So as we go through this, you realize that all of the mosques point with extreme accuracy to Petra. The farthest off any mosque is about 5 degrees. Most of them are around 1 or 2 degrees, and some of them are almost exactly pointing to the city of Petra in southern Jordan. You can check the measurements. You can check the techniques I used for doing the measurements in the book, Early Islamic Qiblas, also in a paper called Jordanian Umayyad Qiblas. Look for those and you can learn more. So 18 mosques, very close to Petra, from north, south, east, and west, with an average of less than 2 degrees of error. These are not all the mosques. There are a few others that point to Petra as well. I'm just listing, for time's sake, 18 mosques here on this video. You can go to the books and you can read about some of the others as well. Now, there's surprising things about these this whole discovery of the Qibla. One is that there are 4 Qiblas. That's surprising, and we will try to look at some of the other Qiblas in other YouTube videos. Again, watch the film. The film has a lot of information in it, or read the books. One of the things that scholars have expressed themselves in amazement is the accuracy of the calculations. I mean, Iran, India, Uzbekistan, even China. Scholars have assumed that the early Arabs didn't have the knowledge to make such accurate calculations. Yet these 18 mosques demonstrate that they did have the ability to make such accurate calculations and point their Qiblas in an accurate direction. So the accuracy is a surprise. Second, people ask, well, how did they do it? And we don't know for sure. There are lots of guesses and theories, and I will make a future YouTube video and suggest a theory that I have, but we really don't know how they did it, but we know that they did it. It's kind of like the old pyramids. We know the Egyptians made the pyramids. We don't know exactly how they make it, but that doesn't bring into doubt that they built the pyramids. The pyramids are there, and these 18 Qiblas point with extreme accuracy to the city of Petra. We know for certain that the early Muslim leaders all prayed their prayers towards Masjid al-Haram in the city of Petra. That is clearly demonstrated by the archaeological evidence. Now, why Petra? What we can discover is that Petra was the location of Masjid al-Haram. The Prophet Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Uthman, Omar, they all prayed towards the city of Petra. And that demonstrates that Petra was the focus of their prayers, and it is the ancient city where Islam began. Muhammad was born there, Muhammad was raised there. That's the place where the Black Rock was. That's the place where the Kaaba was. That's the place where Masjid al-Haram is. And if you watch the film, The Sacred City, they go through a whole bunch of different explanations of how that works and proofs that it was Petra. If you want even more proofs, go to the book Early Islamic Qiblas, and there are 50 other evidences other than the Qiblas that point to the city of Petra as being the location of the first Masjid al-Haram. So Petra fits all the descriptions. Masjid al-Haram was there, and that was the direction of prayer, that all of the true people following Islam, that's how they prayed during those first years of the Islamic religion. Something happened later that it changed, but that is the true direction of prayer, the true Qibla. Now, what is significant about this? People ask me, so what? Why does it matter? Well, I can only imagine some of the important things, so I will explain what seems important to me, and you can think through what might be important to you. First of all, the Quran clearly commands the followers of Islam to pray towards Masjid al-Haram. This is in the second surah of the Quran. It's very clearly commanded. Turn now your face towards a Qibla that I will give to you, Qibla that will please you. Turn your face now to Masjid al-Haram. It's very clear. There are no other options. That is the place that you are to direct your prayers. Also, the pilgrimage. The pilgrimage is made to where? To Masjid al-Haram. Not necessarily to the Black Rock. The Black Rock was located there originally before it was moved. But the pilgrimage is not to the rock. The pilgrimage is to Masjid al-Haram and to all of the places that were there. Mina and all the different places where you go. Arafat, where you go and stand on the mountain and so forth. And those places were all located in Petra, and you'll discover that in the book Early Islamic Qiblas. Pilgrimage was to be made towards the Qibla direction. And when you kill an animal to make it halal, you needed to face Masjid al-Haram. The Quran says nothing about the Black Rock being the direction of prayer, and so for that you might find later by the people when they moved the Black Rock. Then they made the Black Rock important. You do not find it in the earliest accounts of Islam, because it wasn't the highly important thing. The highest important thing was to face Masjid al-Haram. And so an animal to be halal needed to face Masjid al-Haram, the Qibla direction. If that direction has been changed, my question is, does that nullify halal food? Does that nullify all of the pilgrimages ever made? Does that nullify all of the prayers ever made? Because they are in disobedience to the direction that is clearly given in the Quran and that is clearly spoken of by the Prophet Muhammad. It's a difficult thing. I don't have the answers. Islam is going to have to work out these answers. Now, those are 4 basic foundations of Islam, and all around the world, Muslims want to obey the Prophet. This is what the Prophet told them. You need to obey. You need to do what Allah commands you to do. And so this is the message that Muhammad brought. And he asked people to do it. And all down through history, since the Second Civil War, that's when I worked out the dates, trying to figure out when did the Qibla direction change. It was during the Second Civil War when Ibn Zubair rebelled, and he took the Black Rock. He's the guy, I believe, who moved it down into Saudi Arabia. There's every indication of that. And everything changed. There were people refusing to go on pilgrimages. There were some years where there were no pilgrimages. Sometimes they went to both places. So finally they got it sorted out. But it wasn't until the later on in the war that things happened. So the rebel Ibn Zubair began it. The people of Kufa promoted it, and the Abbasids came along and they enforced it. And it was clear that they are the ones then who enforced this thing and tried to make everyone in Islam change their Qibla towards the city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Now, that's how I see it. I urge you to check out for yourself, read the books, look at the data, decide for yourself. Don't just count on, what did this teacher say, or what does that teacher say? Go back and check it for yourself. This is important stuff. And you need to be 100% sure of what the data says. I believe the archaeological data is very clear, and that the very earliest Qibla was towards Petra, and you can find all the other evidences in the books that talk about why Petra fits those descriptions. Now, I have a question. Friends, if you go back and you read the writings of the earlier prophets, do we discover a Qibla direction before the Prophet Muhammad? And the answer is, at least as I have looked, I have not found anything talking about a Qibla direction. The word does not appear anywhere in the writings of the Torah, the writings of Moses, the writings of David, the writings of Solomon, the different things that were written beforehand, the other prophets. There is no mention of a Qibla direction. If you ask Jews or if you ask Christians, where is your Qibla? They will look at you funny because they don't know anything about a Qibla direction. Now, there is a record that some Jews chose to face towards Jerusalem. The prophet Daniel, when he was praying, he chose to face towards Jerusalem. Other people didn't pray. That was his personal choice. And so there are some Jews who had a personal choice to face to Jerusalem, but there is no commands given anywhere that we know of that command Jews or Christians to face in any particular direction. And Jews and Christians will say, God is everywhere. I can face in any direction. They do not have a sacred direction. Yet, when Muhammad arrives on the scene, he announces that he is a prophet of God, and he tells them, you have a Qibla direction. God has spoken to me, and he says there is this sacred direction, and that is towards Masjid al-Haram. And so every mosque during the first 100 years of Islam pointed to Masjid al-Haram in Petra. Not a single mosque pointed to Mecca during the first 100 years of Islam. And that's why Masjid al-Haram is found in Petra. But Petra wasn't the only Qibla. There was another very popular Qibla known as what I call the between direction. And that we'll save for a different YouTube video. Look for the between Qiblas. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another edition in the series of Archaeology and Islam. Thank you for joining me.